Welcome to the Lucidess podcast, where I explore everything because my experience is that everything is connected to everything else, and also because I believe in the infinite, unbounded potential within each of us. And by exploring all things, I'm able to see one or two things from very different perspectives in ways that allow me to change my whole foundation. It's like restructuring of the very foundation upon which I believe life is. So, what I want to share today is the words that keep coming to me are the bookends of my mother's life, the bookends of my mother's life. And before I get to that particular story, I want to start by just sharing my relationship because I think this will help my relationship with my grandmother, Eleanor, my mother's mother. I remember I was 8 when she died, and I'd only met her a handful of times before she passed. I barely knew her. And I remember standing at the gravesite and just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I do kind of remember like thinking, I don't know why I'm so sad. I don't know why I'm so sad. Like I didn't know this, but I was clearly very, very, very sad. To the point where I remember my mom put her hand on my shoulder and said, "It's okay. Like, it's okay." And I do remember thinking, I wonder why my mom's not so sad. Like, why am I so sad and my mom's not so sad? So that's kind of the first sort of powerful memory I have of my grandmother. And then let's fast forward now to I have just gotten a divorce, or I'm just about to get a divorce. I think I've just gotten a divorce, so in my late 30s. And I began having owl dreams. All these owls are coming in my dreams, and they're not always nice. Like sometimes they seem ferocious, and I don't really understand. But just these owl dreams, and they're sort of like plaguing me. They're a little irritating, and of course, I don't believe in any kind of um, spiritual world, so to speak of. And I also would say, although I believed in energy, it was not conscious in any way. Certainly didn't believe in any kind of messages or whatnot. But these owl dreams, they just go on for months and months. And then for some reason, one day I just mentioned to my mom, and she had always loved owls, but whatever. I just said, "Hey, I keep having all these owl dreams." And I kind of tell her a little bit about it. And she looked at me, she goes, "Huh, your grandmother loved owls." Like loved owls. I mean, she had like owl salt and pepper shakers, and she had owl everything. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but not really helpful, whatever. So, some weeks or months go by. It was a while. And then suddenly one day my mom walks in and she says, "I have something for you." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "It's from your grandmother." And I'm thinking, okay, this is whatever, weird. And then she pulls out this gold necklace and it's of an owl. And she said, "This was your grandmother's and she wants you to have it." And I just want to pause here and tell you, my mom was not quick to give things away. So when she gave something away with such sort of like abandonment or freedom, I should say, um, and surety, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, she's going to give this to me? And I was like, oh, okay. So that once I had the owl necklace, it was almost like I began to soften and the messages began to come through more easily. And I began to understand the owl in my dreams, the owl as my grandmother and whatnot. And she became an incredible guiding force for many years, but particularly during those first few years after my divorce. And so, some time goes by. I would say it was at least a year later when the owl dreams were very clear. It was like, my daughters need to visit my gravesite. My daughters need to visit my gravesite. At the time, I didn't even know where my grandma was buried. I couldn't remember where she was buried. And I just was like, for a while, I just didn't do anything because my mom was like estranged from her sisters and she had a lot of anger still toward her mother and her sisters and not really a relationship there. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to mention this, but it just wouldn't go away. So finally one day I said to my mom, I said, look, I'm just going to tell you, I'm so tired of these dreams. Grandma keeps coming and telling me you and your sisters need to go visit her gravesite. So message delivered, like I'm done. Um, and I remember the energy that I still felt with my grandmother and in the dreams was still like there was still angst, but there was some release, meaning like I had delivered the message. I was like, okay, fine. And then it's some months go by. I would say it's many months, maybe even a year. I don't remember the timing. And then one day my mom says, hey, my sisters are coming to town and where one lived on one side of the country, the other lived on the other side. They were both flying into town. We're going to drive up and visit my mom's grave. And I was like, oh man, it's like it's happening. Like it's going to happen. This thing that grandma wants to happen. And I was like, great. And she's like, I'd like to bring him here to meet you since you were the one. I was like, great. Yeah. So we had, it was actually the day they were driving out to drive to the gravesite, which is a few hours away. They came to my house and I met my aunts, and I'd met them before. I knew them better, obviously, than my grandma, but um, we just sat outside on the patio and talked for a little while, and they seemed like three happy young girls. And I was just so grateful. I was like, I'm just so glad they're doing this so that my grandma will leave me alone. And so, just a nice little chat, and then they leave. And I just there was like a relief again. And I was like, oh, great, it's taken care of. And then I can't remember if it was later that day or the next day, but something happened and I was not a part of. And this is when I really began to understand like everything is connected. We are all so deeply connected, more than we can even fathom. I'm going about my day and suddenly my grandmother was just there. I can't explain it. There were very few times when she's been so present. And it was just it was not relief this time, it was release. Like like something had been released, and it was like all this I had been carrying all this energy or responsibility or weight or something, and suddenly it was just gone. And in that moment I knew that her daughters either were at the gravesite or had visited the gravesite, and what needed to be done was done. And it was an immense release. It was just wonderful. And then my grandma didn't visit me for a while after that. And I kind of thought it was done. Like, oh, um, whatever I needed to do, I've done. And, our relationship is completed, whatever. And I didn't really miss her because she was pretty gnarly. She was definitely a gnarly grandma. I felt like she was always nagging, nagging, nagging. Everything I needed to do was always a nag and a force and a blah, blah, blah. I was just like, my gosh, she's just really not very pleasant. And then I don't know, like some months later, she returned, and I knew it was her because I recognized the energy, but it was like her energy was bathed in like love and joy, and she was there to help me again, but she was so different. And I was like, oh my gosh, like somehow she has been transformed simply by her daughters visiting her gravesite. And from that visit, when her daughters went on that journey together, it changed them forever for the rest of their lives, which maybe was just 15 more years before someone died. But for the rest of their lives, they were amiable and able to get along and very much appreciated each other. So, um, okay, so let's fast forward again to just a few years ago. So maybe, I don't know, 15 years after this. And um, I'm handed a book, and it's a book that my grandmother has continued to be a very powerful presence in my life. I'm handed a book, and in this book, it's my grandmother's letters that she wrote home when she was a mother of the three daughters when they were young. My grandfather was the head surgeon at the Air Force Base in Tripoli, Libya, and they spent 18 months living there in 1955 and 1956. And it was my one of this daughters had put together all the letters into a little book. And so these were all my grandmother's letters. And I remember thinking, oh, I should read that. I'll get to know my grandmother better. And it took me a little while before I did. And as I read it, I just really began to see my grandmother, and I began to see some very interesting similarities between my grandmother and I. And they just delighted me. And it was very, very sweet and fun. And I loved reading her stories. What I also realized was my mom was in there, right? I mean, obviously she's 12 and 13 years old in the stories. And I suddenly started seeing my mom as a young girl, like long before she'd ever gotten married and had kids and all the things that she went through. And of course, and I began to see my mom also like, yeah, that is my mom. Like, and it was interesting because some of the things, some of the ways she was not able to be a mom, I realized, as a young girl, I took it personally. Um, and then in these letters, I could see, my mom was just always like that. Like, that's just who and how she was. Um, so it was just a delight. Okay. So then my mom passes away, and I'm not sure if I want to speak because I don't find it interesting, like for me to share like my stories of my mom. I don't know why. It just didn't. I was just like, I don't really want, there's no story that I want to share about my mom. And it just so happened that I had gotten that book out recently and I had reread it and I saw it laying there and I was like, oh, I would love what I would love to do is read some of the stories of my mom as a young girl at her funeral. So I go through the book and I choose out some of my favorite little stories. And as I'm doing it, I'm beginning to realize that how fascinating it is that a mother wrote this about her daughter. And now a daughter is reading it about her mother. And we're like the bookends of her life, right? Like my mother was there when she was, or sorry, my grandmother was there when she was born, and I was there when she died. I was not actually with her when she died, but I'm here when she died. And it just somehow felt things just started to sort of fall into place about some questions I've had. One of them was in indigenous teachings, many of them, many different cultures. They always say that you're connected to your grandparents. You're connected to your grandparents. Like that's really the strong link. I remember learning that and kind of wondering why and being like, well, I don't, when I was learning it, my relationship with my grandmother was quite new. And I remember thinking, well, that's weird. Like I barely even know my grandparents. So like what? That's just weird. Why would that be like that? Um, and then I remember studying when I was studying, PTSD and trauma. And I remember studying epigenetics a good bit. And of course, in epigenetically, you're more similar to your grandparents. So meaning your epigenetics are going to look like your grandparents. So if your grandparents had a certain trauma, there's a good chance you have it. Whereas if your parents' trauma is probably going to end up with your children. This sort of interesting, skipping a generation thing. And so as I'm preparing to talk at my mom's funeral and thinking about my grandma and I as bookends, and obviously there's other children, so I'm not the only bookend, but thinking of my grandma and I as bookends, and then thinking of it epigenetically that who she was is her experience in life are more exhibited in me than in her daughter. And then just also all the years where she's been so closely attuned to me. And I want to talk about music for a moment because this attunement, right? To be attuned to someone or something. I definitely had to learn how to attune to my grandmother. I didn't immediately understand that energy or who she was or how she communicated. And over time, I would say I learned her tune. Let's say it's a chord. Let's say my grandmother has a certain musical tone or tune or chord, and I learned to attune to it. Um, I think we learn people's tunes that are alive and we can attune to it, but we're not able to sort of carry it. This is difficult for me to explain, so let me back up a little bit. since my grandmother is gone, I assume it's because my grandmother is not in physical form. I'm able to somewhat, when I attune to her, it's almost like I'm carrying her tune, like I'm carrying part of her tune. And in the carrying of it, I'm able to communicate and to and also to act in ways that she would needs or something. I'm not quite sure I understand the words. When my mom was alive, I knew her tune, but I was not able to carry it because she's carrying it, right? Like she's carrying it. Now that she's passed, I haven't felt her fully. I remember it was a long, long time before I felt my dad's tune sort of come back, but she seems to be coming back more rapidly than my dad did, for me anyway. And I'm starting to feel her tune, and it's different than when she was alive in that when I feel her, it's like I can carry part of her tune the way I can carry part of my grandmother's. And I would say my grandmother and my mother, their tunes they couldn't be more dissimilar. I don't know enough music theory to tell you two different um, tones that would just kind of grate, but that's probably about how they are, which I don't think they're grading at all, in where they are, but just that I can see how maybe they struggled to understand and get along. But anyway, it's been interesting to begin to attune to my mother's tune in such a way that I can carry her, carry her. And, and obviously her, it's like I'm not the only one carrying these tunes, right? All of my grandmother's daughters and their children and grandchildren, whoever feels attuned to that person is able to carry, their tune. I don't think it's just like one person's going to carry it. But there's definitely a difference in now that my mom's passed. So, so the bookends, the two big bookends of my mother's life, there are many, but I'm one, and my grandmother's another. And to share her words at my mother's funeral was very, very special to me. And I I hope and I believe my mom recognized um, that bringing in of the ancestors, which have always been important to me. So this attunement really is such a beautiful thing, and learning to attune to different ancestors um, has helped me broaden and understand what the experience of their life may have been, um, as they share with me. So I'm just gonna sit quietly for a moment and see if there's anything else, because often I feel rushed, by the podcasting process. And then afterwards I'll think, oh, I wish I would have said that. I forgot to say that. So I'm just going to rest for a minute. There's one other thing. I wasn't actually planning on sharing this, but um, it feels very present. So I did a ceremony the other day for my rape trial, and it's finally been scheduled, but it'll probably be rescheduled. We'll see. But anyway, um, and in it, I was doing a bit of a water ceremony, cleansing away all the blame and the shame that I have felt. And as you listen to other podcasts, there's a lineage, sadly, or there's some kind of strong sexual abuse thing that's been going on down my female line. My mother, I don't know about my grandmother, but definitely my mother, and obviously some other ancestors. And yeah, no, actually, there's more, but I can't tell who because they've asked me not to say. Anyway, let's just say there's plenty of women in my lineage who have suffered sexual abuse. And as I did the ceremony, I felt, and I wasn't doing it for my mom, I was doing it for me. And suddenly my mom was as powerfully present as one of the first times my grandmother came. And she was like almost there to the point where I was a little bit startled, like, whoa. And I realized she had come and there were other ancestors that had come because they had never been in a place where they could truly wash away and cleanse the blame and the shame. And so as I did it for myself, I could feel them all here doing it with me. And it was just so sweet and so powerful. And I forgot again what I keep reminding myself over and over. It's just how incredibly connected we are. That the physical realm is so dull and dense. And it's not, I think so many people rely on it to prove connection. And granted, I absolutely have my moments there too. But more and more, I feel myself being pulled and also being willing and leaning into this connection that is not seen and yet is far more powerful. I think sometimes we think the physical realm is the most powerful connection, and it is dull and dense compared to these other connections. Um, so that was, and then it was interesting when I felt my mother's presence so strongly, and then as the as I began to wind down the ceremony, I hadn't really noticed. I didn't notice when it happened, and then suddenly I just realized I was there all alone, like everyone was gone, and I haven't felt my mom since, but it was again just such an interesting reminder that everything we do ripples out throughout all time and all space. Everything we do. And it affects so many and so much. Even if no one, even if it's never seen or heard. Um, the thing I know is that if I didn't post this podcast, it would still have the same powerful effect in my life. It would not help others, but it would have the same effect just by me speaking the words and giving them vibration and energy. Yes, there's sound, but the vibration, the energy, and the sound. And of course, sound is light, vibrations. So I think that's it. Just wanting to share maybe just a little bit of the beauty I feel for my ancestors, particularly my grandmother Eleanor, and the bookend that she is to my mother in her life. And just also grateful for my mom. And I very much wanted my son, and my son wanted to carry my mom's casket, and he got to. And that was important to me because she's going to play such a powerful role in his life. I can feel it. He feels it. He's known it for a long time. And so it's important to me that he get to begin that connection, that he begins to learn to attune to my mother in such a way that she can help him. And she's amazing for all the difficulties and the challenges of her being my mother, and even some of them yet to be, fully dealt with and healed and resolved. But I'm so glad that she is his grandmother because she's going to be just a badass, amazing guide for him. So appreciate that. And I'm glad that he got to carry the casket and begin that journey with her. the same way I began my journey with my grandmother at her gravesite. So, so much love to and for my ancestors. And this just amazing, mysterious, mystical, fractal existence. Yeah. So, love to you all. Have a beautiful day.